Lucius Dentatus fought in over 120 battles, had 45 wounds on the front of his body, won 8 one-on-one duels, and collected so many crowns, spears, and torques as decorations that he could barely wear them. But around 450 BC, the corrupt magistrate Appius Claudius saw the 64-year-old veteran as a threat, so he sent Dentatus on a fake scouting mission with a handful of bribed soldiers. In a narrow ravine, they ambushed him, but the old man fought back, cutting down 8 of them before they could pin him. Unable to beat him hand to hand, the survivors scrambled up the slopes above and crushed him under a rain of stones and javelins. When his body was recovered, the corpses of his murderers lay beside it. Spartacus was a Thracian gladiator who in 73 BC led the largest slave revolt Rome ever faced. He broke out of a gladiator school in Capua with around 70 men armed with little more than kitchen knives, and within 2 years had forged an army of tens of thousands that smashed one Roman force after another. His real weapon was not muscle, but command. He drilled escaped slaves into disciplined units and repeatedly out-generaled trained Roman armies, humiliating the Republic for 2 straight years. His end came when Marcus Licinius Crassus, a general so ruthless he executed his own retreating soldiers to restore discipline, cornered the rebels in southern Italy in 71 BC. Betrayed by pirates who were meant to ferry them to safety, the slaves were trapped. In the final hopeless battle near the Silarus River, Spartacus tried to hack a path straight through the enemy lines to kill Crassus himself, dropping 2 centurions before he was swarmed and cut down. His body was never identified among the dead. Rome's revenge was brutal. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, left to rot as a warning. Lü Bu was the most feared fighter of the dying Han dynasty, nicknamed the Flying General for his unmatched skill on horseback with halberd and bow. But he was also a serial traitor who had murdered 2 separate foster fathers for personal gain, and that reputation is what finally killed him. In 199 AD, besieged at Sha Pi by the warlord Cao Cao and starving, his own exhausted officers tied him up in his sleep and handed him over. Lü Bu begged for his life, offering to serve Cao Cao and help him conquer the empire. Cao Cao actually hesitated, tempted by the offer. Then, allied warlord Liu Bei leaned in and quietly reminded him exactly what happened to the last 2 men Lü Bu had called master. That settled in. The greatest warrior of the age was hanged and then beheaded for good measure. Guan Yu fought during the same chaotic Three Kingdoms civil war period in China. He was a giant of a man for his era, renowned for his strength, skill with a heavy crescent blade, and ice-cold courage. His most famous feat came at the Battle of Boma, where he charged alone through an entire enemy army, rode straight up to the elite general Yan Liang, and decapitated him. For years he carved through countless battles for his sworn brother Liu Bei. His downfall was overreach. In 219 AD, he pushed deep into Cao Cao's territory, while his rival, Sun Quan, quietly sent a general to seize his bases behind him. Cut off from supply, his army melted away around him, and he was captured along with his son and beheaded. Sun Quan, suddenly nervous about having killed such a revered man, shipped the severed head to Cao Cao to spread the blame. It did him a little good. Centuries later, Guan Yu was recognized as the Chinese god of war and is still widely worshipped today. Khalid ibn al-Walid was a legendary Arab commander who earned the title Sword of Allah by never losing a single battle across roughly 100 engagements, shattering both the Byzantine and Persian empires for the Rashidun Caliphate. For a man who killed on that scale, his death was a bitter irony. Stripped of his command by the Caliph Umar, he died of illness in his bed in the city of Homs in 642. The undefeated general, his body a roadmap of old scars, is said to have wept at the end, saying he had thrown himself into battle after battle, hoping to die a martyr. When the news reached the Caliph, he mourned and forgave their old quarrel. Egil Skallagrímsson was an Icelandic Viking who was a poet and berserker in equal measure. According to legend, when he was just 7 years old, he split a rival boy's skull with an axe over a game, and several others in the ensuing brawl. He spent the rest of his life raiding, engaging in holmgang dueling, and cutting down anyone who crossed him. On one occasion, he tore out an enemy's throat with his teeth when a duel went badly. He survived numerous assassination attempts ordered by his lifelong enemies, King Eirik Bloodaxe and Queen Gunhildr, and even killed the king's son. He lived into his 80s, going blind, deaf and frail, and died of old age at around 90 years old. The strange part came centuries later. When a church was relocated, his bones were exhumed, and his skull was found to be so thick and unnaturally ridged that a man who tested it by swinging an axe on it could barely leave a white scratch. El Cid, born Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, was the Castilian warlord who never lost a battle and carved out his own personal kingdom by capturing the city of Valencia from the Moors. But on July 10th, 1099, with the city under siege by a massive Almoravid army, he died inside its walls of natural causes, believed to be the ravages of famine or illness, aged 56. What happened next is the legend that made him immortal. His wife, Jimena, fearing the city would fall, had his body embalmed, dressed in his armor, his sword tied to his hand, and strapped upright onto his warhorse, Babieca, then sent it out at the head of his troops. The besieging Moors, seeing the dead El Cid, apparently riding to fight them once more, panicked and fled. Prithviraj Chauhan was an Indian king who crushed the invading Persian Ghurids at the First Battle of Tarain, sending Muhammad of Ghor fleeing wounded from the field. He is celebrated as one of the bravest warrior kings in Indian history. But a year later, Muhammad of Ghor returned with more men, and this time a dawn surprise attack shattered Chauhan's army. He was captured and dragged back to the Ghurid capital. Legend has it he was blinded with red-hot irons, then later paraded out to perform archery for the Sultan's amusement. His loyal court poet, Chand Bardai, allowed to stand beside him, recited a single coded verse that secretly described the exact distance and direction of the Sultan's seat. Guided only by that sound, the blind king drew and loosed one arrow that struck Muhammad of Ghor dead in February 1192, knowing what would follow. Chauhan and his poet then stabbed each other to deny their captors any further revenge. Most historians believe he was simply executed in captivity, but the arrow version is the one India has never forgotten. William Marshal was an Anglo-Norman knight, often called the greatest who ever lived. He was undefeated across some 500 brutal tournaments, and a veteran of countless real battles, serving 5 English kings. In one skirmish he even unhorsed the future King Richard the Lionheart, and deliberately killed Richard's horse instead of striking the prince himself. After a lifetime spent in mounted combat, he achieved the rarest possible death for a man of his trade. A peaceful one. He died in his bed at Caversham in 1219, surrounded by his family. On his deathbed, he fulfilled a vow he had taken decades earlier on crusade, and was formally received into the Knights Templar, dying in their white mantle. Richard the Lionheart was the Crusader King of England, a fearless commander who always led from the front. That habit eventually killed him at a trivial little siege in 1199. He had marched on the small castle of Chalus in his French territories over a petty dispute about a hoard of treasure a peasant was rumored to have dug up. One evening, Richard was strolling the perimeter, without his full armor, admiring the nerve of a lone defender who kept shooting at him, when that same defender, said to be a boy, put a crossbow bolt into his shoulder. The wound itself shouldn't have been fatal, but an unskilled surgeon butchered it while extracting the bolt, and his arm rotted with gangrene. As he was dying, Richard had the boy brought before him and pardoned him. The king died days later in his mother's arms. His grief-stricken mercenary captain ignored the king's wish and had the boy flayed alive, then hanged. Gjergj Kastrioti Skanderbeg was the Albanian commander who held the entire Ottoman Empire at bay for 25 years, winning battle after battle against vastly larger armies. Some accounts claim Skanderbeg personally killed around 3,000 men in his battles. No enemy ever managed to kill him. He died of malaria in the town of Häyhä in January 1468. His death achieved what the Ottoman sultans never could. Albanian resistance crumbled within a decade. And when the Ottomans finally captured the city, their soldiers dug open his grave and broke his bones into pieces, setting the fragments in silver and gold to wear as amulets, utterly convinced that carrying a sliver of Skanderbeg would pass his legendary courage on into them. Tlahuicole was a Tlaxcalan warrior of such towering reputation that when the Aztecs finally captured him in battle around 1518, Emperor Moctezuma did something almost unheard of for a prisoner. He freed him and handed him command of an entire Aztec army against the Purepecha. Tlahuicole led the campaign, fought well, and came back victorious. And still, he refused to simply walk home to Tlaxcala because a captured warrior who returned alive lived in disgrace. So he asked instead for a warrior's death, reserved for the bravest prisoners. He was tethered by the ankle to a massive circular stone, so he couldn't escape, and handed a war club edged with harmless feathers instead of razor obsidian. Then set against a relentless succession of the Empire's most elite eagle and jaguar warriors, all of course carrying real weapons. Anchored to the stone, half crippled by old wounds, and hopelessly outmatched, he fought anyway. He killed 8 outright, and wounded more than 20, exhausting wave after wave of the Empire's finest, before he was finally overwhelmed. Only then was he hauled up onto the altar, so the Aztec priests could cut the heart from his chest as an offering, a death he had chosen freely over the shame of survival. Pier Gerlofs Donia was a Frisian farmer who became a rebel after Habsburg mercenaries burned his farm to the ground and murdered his wife. Legend says he later hunted down 5 of the killers with a heavy plow. A reputed giant of a man, he fought with a Zweihänder sword, nearly 7 foot long, said to take the heads of several men in a single swing, and led a pirate fleet that terrorized the Dutch coastline. He and his forces captured and razed the Habsburg-controlled town of Asperen, killing nearly the entire town's population in a brutal raid. Yet, worn down, ill and disillusioned with a rebellion that was falling apart, he laid down his arms and died of natural causes in the town of Sneek in 1520. His enormous sword still hangs in a Frisian museum, far too heavy for almost any visitor to lift. Galvarino was a Mapuche warrior fighting the Spanish conquest of Chile during the Long Arauco War. Captured after the Battle of Lagunillas in 1557, he was singled out by the Spanish governor Mendoza to be made a warning. He had the hands and noses of many captives cut off before releasing them, and Galvarino lost both of his hands, hacked off at the wrists, then was set loose to spread fear and submission among his people. But it had the exact opposite effect. Galvarino went straight before the Mapuche War Council, held up his mutilated arms as proof of what surrender brought, and demanded they keep fighting. He then had knives and blades lashed tightly to his stumps and returned to battle, leading charges and cutting down Spanish soldiers. He was captured a second time at the Battle of Miyarapue. Defiant to the very end, he told his captors that if they freed him, he would tear them apart with his teeth. Accounts differ on his exact death. Some say he was hanged, others that he was thrown to the Spaniards' war dogs, but each version agrees he met it without flinching. Miyamoto Musashi was Japan's most famous swordsman, undefeated in more than 60 duels, many of which he won carrying only a carved wooden sword, including his legendary killing of the master swordsman Sasaki Kojiro with a blade he had shaped from a boat oar on the way to the fight. Having outlived every single opponent who ever faced him, he chose the manner of his own ending. In his final years, he withdrew to a cave and wrote the Book of Five Rings, his treatise on swordsmanship, and strategy that is still read today. He died in that cave in 1645, almost certainly of cancer, reportedly working on his writing nearly to the last, and then passing away seated upright, his sword resting at his side. Hongi Hika was a Napuhi chief who transformed Maori warfare by arming his people with European muskets on a scale no one had seen, then unleashing them in the brutal musket wars and killing thousands of rival warriors and civilians across New Zealand. In 1821, a suit of chainmail armor, gifted to him during a visit to England, saved his life by stopping a musket ball that should have killed him. His luck ran out in 1827, when a bullet fired during a skirmish passed clean through his chest, puncturing a lung. He lived another 14 months with the open wound. It was widely said that people could actually hear the wind whistling through the hole in his chest each time he breathed, right up until his death in March 1828. Shaka Zulu forged the Zulu people into the deadliest military machine in southern Africa. He scrapped the long throwing spear, which left a warrior unarmed once it was hurled, in favor of the short stabbing ikua, designed for brutal close quarters combat, and drilled his regiments to encircle the enemy with his bullhorns formation. He personally fought and killed in battle, and made his soldiers ditch their sandals to harden their bare feet by dancing on thorns. But after his beloved mother, Nandi, died in 1827, his grief curdled into something monstrous. He ordered a national mourning so deranged that thousands were executed for failing to cry convincingly. He also banned crops from being planted and had milk poured out so the whole nation would starve alongside him. His inner circle decided he had to go. In September 1828, at his royal homestead, while he was receiving a delegation, his half-brothers, Dingane and Langana, stabbed him to death. As he lay bleeding out, he is said to have looked up at his killers and taunted them with a prophecy, telling them they would never rule the land themselves because white men were already crossing the sea and would soon swallow it and them whole. His body was dumped into an empty grain pit, and the prophecy more or less came true. Historians estimate that Shaka Zulu and his armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 2 million people. Alvin C. York was an American corporal serving in the 82nd Division during the Meuse-Argonne offensive in France during World War I. With German machine guns cutting his unit apart, York worked to a flank and picked off gunner after gunner a single shot at a time. By the end, he had killed around 25 men, silenced 35 guns, and walked 132 stunned prisoners back to American lines. He went home the most decorated soldier of the war, and hated the fame that came with it, pouring his energy into building schools instead. A run of strokes wore him down in his last years, and he died in bed in 1964. Simo Häyhä was a quiet Finnish farmer who became the deadliest sniper in recorded history. During the Winter War against the Soviet Union between 1939 and 40, he killed over 500 enemy soldiers in roughly 100 days, all of it in deep snow and brutal cold. He worked with plain iron sights rather than a scope to keep his profile low, packed down the snow in front of him so his muzzle blast wouldn't throw up a telltale cloud, and kept snow in his mouth so his breath would not steam in the freezing air and give away his position. The Soviets nicknamed him the White Death and threw entire counter-sniper teams at him. In March 1940, one of their explosive bullets finally caught him in the lower jaw and tore away much of the lower half of his face. But he survived. He slipped into a coma and woke from it, purely by chance on the very day the war ended. Disfigured for life and facing years of surgery, he simply went home, lived a long and quiet life as a hunter and dog breeder, and died in 2002 at the age of 96. Jebe earned his name, which means arrow, in the most literal way possible. Before he served Genghis Khan, he fought against him and in one battle shot the Khan's horse out from under him. Dragged before Genghis afterward, he confessed to the shot openly instead of lying, and the Khan, impressed by the sheer nerve, made him a general rather than a corpse. He became one of the deadliest commanders of the Mongolian conquests, running the fleeing Shah of Khwarezm into the ground and tearing through the Caucasus and the Russian principalities, annihilating a combined army at the Khalkha River. Eventually, he fell ill on the long ride home, around 1225, and died somewhere on the open steppe. Some scholars suggest he may have been killed in 1223 by Russian-allied Kipchak forces near the Dnieper River. Naresuan the Great was a Thai warrior king who shattered Burmese domination of Siam, repelling massive invasions and conquering neighboring regions like Cambodia. Raised as a political hostage in the Burmese court he would later fight, his most legendary feat came in 1593. With both armies watching, he met the Burmese crown prince in single combat on war elephants and cut him down with one powerful strike of his glaive. He eventually fell ill while campaigning in the north in 1605 and died of disease, likely smallpox, at the height of his power. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was a Soviet history student in Kiev who walked out of the lecture hall the moment Germany invaded and demanded a rifle. She became one of the deadliest snipers who ever lived. 309 confirmed kills at Odessa and Sevastopol, dozens of them enemy snipers cut down in patient, nerve-shredding duels. Wounded by shell fire and judged too valuable to lose, she was pulled from the line and sent to tour the United States. She worked as a historian after the war before a stroke took her in 1974. Lapu-Lapu was the chief of Mactan Island in the Philippines, the one ruler who refused to submit to the arriving Spanish. In April 1521, he led his warriors into the surf and personally fought Ferdinand Magellan's armored landing party in brutal close combat, killing the famous explorer on the beach before he could complete the first voyage around the world. It's the most celebrated victory in early Philippine history, and yet its hero then simply vanishes. No surviving account agrees on how, when, or even where Lapu-Lapu died. Many historians say he lived into his 70s and died of old age.